Senator Ricahard Madaleno is a member of the Maryland State Senate, representing the state's 18th district in Montgomery County. He was born in Florida and graduated from Syracuse University with a BA in History and Soviet Studies and a master's in Public Administration. He has worked in the state and local government for over 20 years. First, for the Maryland General Assembly is the Department of Fiscal Services, which deals with the state budget matters. In 1995, he was hired by Montgomery County Executive Doug Duncan to work for the Montgomery County's Office of Intergovernmental Relations as a legislative analysis. In 2002, he was elected to the Maryland House of Delegates, and in 2006 was elected to the Maryland State Senate and re-elected again in 2010. Senator Madaleno has led efforts to advance legislation important to the gay and lesbian community, among other issues. When Governor O'Malley was elected in 2006, he believed civil unions gave some gay and lesbian couples adequate rights, and that was considered good enough. The senator worked to convince the governor that the idea of civil unions, while politically attractive, just didn't work. He's been a leader in a lot of other areas, especially in the areas of budget and taxation. The Washington Post called him a secret weapon for playing a key role in increasing state education funding for Montgomery County schools, and he is considered an expert in the state budget process and serves on the Senate Budget and Taxation Committee. It is my honor to introduce Senator Ricahard Madaleno from Montgomery County.
Thank you all for coming out today. Today is a very interesting and remarkable day, and I just want to start off by actually respecting your time by setting my timer so that you know that I don't, politicians, you put a microphone in front of us and we can sit around for a long time talking. So I just wanted to let you know that today you are participating in a fascinating exercise about commemorating the adoption of our Constitution, because you may not know that, we all know about the First Amendment, we all know we live in a free country, and you are participating in an activity that is compelled by federal law. I don't know if you realize this, but about a decade ago, the United States Congress passed a bill that said that every educational institution in this country that receives federal funds, and I think it would be hard to find one that doesn't receive federal funds, is required to commemorate our Constitution, which among other things gives you the right to free speech. So how fascinating it is that we live in a country that is that so cherishes freedom and freedom of expression and freedom of thought that we require every educational institution to require you to come in and think about how lucky you are to have that freedom of expression and thought. So it's a uniquely, I guess, American tradition that your institution is compelled to celebrate the freedom that we enjoy. Last week was and is in our history a fascinating week of commemorations and anniversaries, because not only is it the actual anniversary of the adoption of the Constitution, but I'm sure many of you saw in the news, or you knew from your own history classes, that last week was also the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Antietam, fought right in Maryland, and as a result, it's the anniversary of President Lincoln announcing the Emancipation Proclamation. So it is also a very important date in the history of our country. It's also the anniversary of the Battle of Baltimore, which we are coming up in 2 years on the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Baltimore, the writing of the Star-Spangled Banner. And for any of you who want to participate in 2 years, there's going to be an enormous celebration in Baltimore and in Maryland to commemorate the time in which the people of Baltimore, and specifically the people of this area, came together, rallied the citizenry to stop the British and to more or less save the country at a time when it looked as if, after burning Washington, they would easily take Baltimore, but the people of Maryland said no and carried the day. But I bring that up because I want to talk about we often, about our state's checkered constitutional history, because when you're talking about the Constitution, usually you just talk about the US Constitution and the fact that it's a very clean, relatively short, I believe 4,700 word document. Well, the state constitution of Maryland, believe it or not, is 47,000 words long. So in order to govern ourselves, we have a document that is 10 times longer than the document that governs the entire country. But I bring it up because it's very important to note that the reason why we have a federal constitution is because each one of the states started to draft constitutions. In 1776, after the Declaration of Independence, every state had to figure out how were they going to govern themselves, because all of the traditional norms which had come from the crown were now gone. And so individuals in the different states, including our own, seized upon the idea of drafting a constitution. So the 13 states went forward with constitutions before the federal government had a constitution, because remember, it took more than a decade for the states to come together to draft a national constitution, because we only had the Articles of Confederation, which laid out a much looser confederation of states. So it's the individual states that started our revolution in constitutional thought. Maryland put forward a very interesting constitution initially in 1776. You might be interested to know that many of you may follow Maryland politics, and you might know that Maryland has a unique system where there are 3 delegates. We call our lower chamber the House of Delegates. There are 3 delegates per district. Well, in 1776, guess what? There were 3 delegates per district. But the Constitution had a fascinating addition to it, that for the annual session of the annual session of the General Assembly, it was up to the governor to invite which one of the 3 he wanted to come. Yeah. So imagine how that would work today if you elected 3 people, but the governor got to choose which one of those 3 people came to Annapolis to vote on the laws. You can imagine the outcome might be very different. Well, that was our Constitution in 1776. Well, we know we celebrated the 225th anniversary of the US Constitution. Does anyone know how old our current Constitution is in Maryland? So how many constitutions we've had in Maryland? How many people think we're still on our first Constitution in Maryland? Probably the way I just answered the question. I was telling you, how many people would be surprised? How many people think we're on our second Constitution in Maryland? Anyone? Our third Constitution in Maryland? A few hands went up. Our fourth Constitution in Maryland? Our fifth Constitution in Maryland? The correct answer is 4 and 5. We are on our fourth Constitution, which was enacted in 1867 by the voters. But in the late 1960s, we had another constitutional convention that totally rewrote the Constitution, that was put before the voters, and the voters voted it down. But in the 20 years that followed, just about every piece of that convention was put forward as a separate amendment to the Constitution, and the voters have adopted almost each and every piece. So arguably, we are on our de facto fifth Constitution. I think people are surprised to hear of that. The Congress, you probably all know how the Congress is elected. The House of Representatives by the people, equal districts divided by the states by their population. And then the Senate, 2 senators per state, regardless of size. And that's been that way for 225 years. The House has grown as the population of the country has grown, but that's pretty much the model. The Maryland General Assembly, which has existed for close to 400 years in our state, how many people believe we use the structure that we used 200 years ago? Well, 100 years ago. I mean, the way we establish the membership of the General Assembly. We have a House and the Senate. That's been the same, but how people are elected. You might be surprised that our current structure only dates back to the mid-1960s. Why is that? Because, believe it or not, people went to court to sue to say that the structure of the General Assembly was unconstitutional. Why? Because we had a House of the People in the House of Delegates by population, but we had 1 senator per county and 6 from Baltimore City. Now people might laugh and go, well, why did Baltimore City have 6 and everyone else, and Baltimore County had 1? Well, when that structure was put in place in the late 1800s, more than half the people in the state of Maryland lived within the city of Baltimore. So it wasn't a great deal for them because they could have had many more. Under our current focus on how you apportion seats, they should have had many more people representing them, but they only had 6. How was the House of Delegates apportioned? 1 delegate per county, and as you went up in size, you could get up to 6. Baltimore City had 4 districts of 6. It was 4 quadrants of 6 delegates. In 1900, everyone knows that Montgomery County is the largest jurisdiction in the state today. Prince George's is 2nd. Baltimore County is 3rd. Baltimore City 4th. In 1900, Baltimore City by far the largest jurisdiction. Anyone want to hazard a guess of what was the 2nd largest jurisdiction? The only other county in the state that had 6 members of the House of Delegates? Not Montgomery County. Not Anne Arundel. Not Prince George's. Nowhere in the metro. Allegheny County, where Cumberland is. That's how big Cumberland was, and that's how little the rest of the state was. 1 century, total change. And as a result, our Constitution changed to reflect it. I brought up Antietam because I think it's also important to remember what we would do in order, and what our ancestors did in order to protect the Constitution. During the Civil War, there was a tremendous amount of fighting and obviously division within the state of Maryland. Many of you know or may have seen last year, the first casualties of the Civil War don't happen at Fort Sumter, they happen in downtown Baltimore. When Massachusetts troops are being rushed to Washington to try to guard the city from Confederate troops trying to get up from Richmond, and while marching across downtown Baltimore, they're attacked by a pro-Southern mob. People start throwing bricks and rocks, start firing. People on both sides are killed. If you ever walk into the Massachusetts State House, a beautiful building, there's a huge mural on their central staircase that depicts the Battle of Baltimore in the Civil War, because of the bravery and the loss of lives of the Massachusetts soldiers coming through to Washington. Baltimore was so bad during the Civil War, it was so dangerous during the Civil War, every bridge leading into Baltimore was burned by pro-Southern sympathizers. So the only way that the Union Army could get to Washington was to take people by train to Havre de Grace, which is up on the Susquehanna River, take a ferry down to Annapolis, because the precursor of the Naval Academy was already in Annapolis, dock there, and take the railroad into Washington from Annapolis. In fact, the mayor of the city of Annapolis had to be threatened with having the city leveled in order to allow the ships to dock, because they didn't want the troops to get to Washington. So President Lincoln, does everyone know what habeas corpus is? Habeas corpus is the rule that you can't be held without charges filed against you. Lincoln, in order to save the Constitution, suspended habeas corpus in Maryland along the railroads. So if he thought you were kind of dangerous, if any police officer, if any Union troop thought that you were dangerous, you could be arrested and put in jail, because that was what was required to save freedom. In fact, there was a large effort in Maryland to secede. All the southern states seceded. Maryland has a horrible history of allowing slavery, had slavery in 1860. There was an effort to get Maryland to secede. Lincoln knew You couldn't let Maryland secede because that would, by default, give Washington to the South. The Confederacy could establish their capital in Washington. It would be indefensible. The governor of Maryland called a special session in May of 1861. They got together. They argued in Frederick. They couldn't meet in Annapolis because there were federal troops in Annapolis. It wasn't safe. They went to Frederick. It's the only time the General Assembly hasn't met in Annapolis. Went to Frederick, had a meeting, couldn't make any decision, walked away. Things got worse. The actual fighting started at Bull Run, and so hostilities broke out. The demand for another special session. They have it in Frederick, scheduled in Frederick in September of 1861. You probably didn't hear about this last year because the anniversary date is September 11th, 2011. We obviously were focused on a different anniversary on September 11th. But that day, the General Assembly was supposed to meet. What do you think President Lincoln did? He sent federal troops to arrest elected members of the General Assembly, the mayor of Baltimore, the police commissioner, a whole host of elected officials in Baltimore who he suspected of wanting to secede, had them imprisoned at Fort McHenry. And guess what? The vote, well, the General Assembly never met because clearly they didn't have the quorum to meet. So if we heard about that today in Pakistan, or we heard about that today in the Congo, people would say, oh, that's a third world country. What would we do to save freedom in this country? What was done in order to save the Constitution? It's very interesting. How would you feel about that today in regards to a threat? How about if someone said, well, BWI Airport is so important that we're going to suspend habeas corpus around BWI or Andrews Air Force Base or any of the airports around, just to make sure that no one goes near it that we don't want. How would the reaction be right now, today? Interesting issues to think about as we think about this document that has protected us all of this through all of these centuries, and what's been done in the name of freedom to protect it, whether forcing your institution to have a politician come talk about the Constitution, to actually having people, other Marylanders, arrested to protect the Union. Just things to think about in our own history, and as we judge other countries around the world and their movement to democracy, understanding what has happened in our state. Now, I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the interesting issues that are facing us today that you'll see on the ballot when you go to vote, and I hope all of you will vote on November 6th, or avail yourself of an absentee ballot or early voting. But hopefully all of you will vote this year, because there are, not only is the president on the ballot, the US Senate seat from Maryland on the ballot, all the members of the House of Representatives on the ballot, you have a whole series of very interesting ballot questions, something that's kind of unusual for Maryland, because we don't have that tradition like other states have to have a lot of ballot measures. But there are going to be 4 questions in particular that I think are very interesting for all of you. Now, when I was introduced, we talked about my work to help secure the right for gay and lesbian couples to get a civil marriage license in Maryland. That will be on the ballot this year, whether or not Maryland will be the very first state to approve that by the voters to let gay and lesbian couples marry in our state. That's question 6. Question 4 is something called the Maryland Dream Act. It would allow all Maryland high school students, all graduates of a Maryland high school, to attend a community college at the in-state tuition rate, no matter what their documentation status is. So if you are an undocumented resident of the country, but you went to a Maryland high school, you graduated, your family has paid taxes, you could get the in-state, in-county rate of where you live. That's question 4. Question 5 is congressional redistricting. every 10 years, you got to redraw the maps. Every state redraws their maps. If they have more than one district, we have 8. We are one of, I think, 8 states in the country that has the Democratic Party controlling the levers of redistricting. 20 states were completely controlled by the Republican Party. The other states have different processes or divided government. So the maps favor, no surprise, the Democratic Party and our candidates. But it'll be before you whether or not to reject those maps and have us do it all over again. That's been done 3 times before, believe it or not, in Maryland history, to force another redistricting. That's question 5. And then finally, probably all of you who spend any time watching television know about question 7, which is about expanding legalized gaming in the state to add a 6th casino in Prince George's County and to allow for table games at all the existing casinos. And that is being, bombarded with ads on television. In the Washington area, we're seeing a lot of ads. I would imagine in the Baltimore area, you're seeing the same ads for and against question 7. So you will have a very interesting opportunity when you go to the ballot or go to the election booth on November 6th to shape the future of our state in particular. Because not only will you be voting for all of these very important offices, you will be voting for a number of measures that will kind of express the direction of our state for the next few years. Because as all of you know as young people, what are going to be probably the two most important things in your life, the 2 most important things that are going to determine the arc of your life? Well, one, your education. That's why you're sitting here. Obviously, you're on this campus because you're trying to get a better education to improve your opportunities, to improve your earning capabilities. There is a high correlation, obviously, between education and income and success. And the other, your marriage. Those 2 things, your education and your marriage, are probably the 2 most profound things that impact your entire adult life. Imagine if your state says you cannot have either, or you can't have an education, you can't have a marriage. What is the impact on your adult life? You'll make that decision as a voter on November 6th. That's how the system works. You will be able to go in and shape that outcome. You'll be able to say yes to providing that opportunity to a young person to get an education, or say no, we need to draw the line somewhere in Maryland. You'll be able to say yes to gay and lesbian couples who have a lifetime commitment of love and devotion. You will have that opportunity to say yes, they should be allowed to get a civil marriage license. Not a religious marriage, that's left up to every denomination, but should a gay or lesbian couple be able to be married in the state of Maryland, get a license in the state of Maryland. And you'll be able to vote on who represents you through redistricting and what happens with, in essence, our state budget because of the money that will or will not come from expanded gaming. So you have a unique opportunity this November, one very rarely afforded to people in Maryland, to make decisions that will have a profound impact on this institution, how much money is available for education, who can come to this institution, and on the lives of so many of your friends, neighbors, classmates, the people in your community who will have an opportunity to get an education, who will have an opportunity to have the dignity and responsibility and that only comes through marriage. So I hope each and every one of you will avail yourself of that opportunity, the opportunity that, as we talked about, with the War of 1812, the Revolution, the Civil War, that so many Americans, I don't mean to be overly dramatic, but that so many of our ancestors died to make sure we would have this possibility. So you need to vote, you need to be registered, and you need to vote this year because you will decide the trajectory of our state probably for the next 10 to 20 years in this election. And you will help decide the trajectory of our nation. I'm not even going to get into the partisan. Obviously, you probably can guess who I'm supporting for president and senator, and I don't want to get into that, but these are profound decisions that are left up to us as citizens, and you should not shirk that responsibility. So I've gone on long enough. Fortunately, the lights are so bright that I can't see if anyone's asleep. But I would be happy to take whatever questions that you have about any of the things I talked about or anything else that you would like to ask a Maryland State Senator. Yes?
Let's say they were legally able to get married.
Can you say louder, please?
If they were legally able to get married in the state of Maryland, if they went to another state that didn't recognize, would they not be married in that state, or would they recognize them as married?
So that's a very good question about what happens to, should we allow gay and lesbian couples in Maryland to get a license in Maryland? What happens when they go to Virginia? For example, Virginia that has a constitutional amendment that says we don't recognize it. That is an unsettled question that will be before the Supreme Court, I would imagine, in the next 2 months. Because there are 6 states that allow people to get married. Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, and Iowa. Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, and Iowa. I know it's an interesting grouping of states that you don't. They're not even in this. They're not even in the same football conference. What?
I thought Iowa didn't pass it.
No, Iowa was a court decision. Some of the states got it through a court decision in their state. Some of it through legislative action. So the Supreme Court is going to rule on the constitutionality of something called the Defense of Marriage Act. In the 1990s, Congress passed a law that said 3 things: that marriage is between a man and a woman, that no state can be compelled to recognize a marriage from another state, and that 3, the federal government will not recognize any marriage but between a man and a woman. And the case that's going to be before them is about that 3rd piece, to say, look, if a state has recognized, like Massachusetts, New York, you have states that have gone through this process and they recognize marriage and people are married, shouldn't they be able to get their Social Security? Shouldn't they be able to file taxes together? Shouldn't they be able to access all the other federal benefits that come with marriage? Not should Virginia have to recognize a Maryland law or Maryland marriage, because that would remain settled under the federal law, but does it mean something from the federal benefit side? And that issue will be before the courts soon. That's the anticipation. There will be another case that will be coming to the Supreme Court that they could review on something called Proposition 8, which was a vote 4 years ago in California, where the legislature had allowed gay and lesbian couples to get married. And then because California has a voter initiative process that we don't have in Maryland, it's kind of the difference between the East Coast and the West Coast states. You can't petition something directly to the ballot. You can only petition something that's moved through the legislature. So in California, what they did is they petitioned a constitutional amendment to the ballot to override the state law. That was adopted by the voters, and then people went to court saying, you can't take away something we already had. And that case is bubbling up. The Supreme Court could decide to take that case and say, there's a constitutional right to allow 2 people of the same gender to get married. I doubt if this court will be that aggressive to overturn all of it. So that's why I think just that smaller piece will be before the courts this year. For many years, most states in their constitution, and other states like Maryland in our law, prohibited people of different races from getting married. The Supreme Court, in a famous decision called Loving v. Virginia, overturned that all of those constitutional provisions, all of those statutes, saying that it was unconstitutional to prohibit 2 people, in this case of the opposite sex, from getting married. When they did that, more than 30 states had already removed the prohibitions. So you could argue that the Supreme Court was catching up to a majority of the country when they decided to make it the law of the land. right now, with only 6 states with marriage equality and 32 states with prohibitions, I can't imagine this Supreme Court will move that aggressively to adopt or to overturn all these federal prohibitions and say you have to let gay and lesbian couples marry anywhere in the country and you have to recognize it. So I was listening to a fascinating interview with a noted constitutional law professor at Yale, Akil Amari, I think his name. He has a new book out about the history of the Constitution. And one of the observations that he made is as the Constitution is reinterpreted by different members of the judiciary, that often they wait and see, they're catching up to things that have been happening already in the country. When they announced Roe v. Wade, well, many states have moved forward with legalizing abortion. When they announced Griswold v. Connecticut, which is this landmark case about birth control and whether or not you could have access to birth control. Well, most states had already removed prohibitions about using birth control. So they kind of nationalized decisions that are already accepted through a fair amount of the country. And I would imagine on this issue, the same will hold true. I know you asked a smaller question and I blew it up to a much larger thing, but that's, I wanted to give you kind of the full look. I see a hand all the way up there.
For question 5, redistricting, new mapping, how does this affect the schools? Will it affect where the children go to school eventually, or will it come to that point?
No, in this case, it's only for the 8 congressional districts. So it would only require the General Assembly to go back and redraw the 8 congressional districts. The individual state legislative districts, the county council districts, the school board districts, school districts, all of that would not be impacted by this, which is one of the interesting questions of why someone like myself has argued that this is purely a partisan maneuver by our friends in the other party to try to revisit this, because if they truly were interested in about a more balanced approach, well, they would have petitioned the state legislative districts, they would have fought this out in all the different counties. You know, where they have control, it's fine. It's where they don't that they've put this issue before you. In my humble partisan opinion, I realize that's my feeling about it. I'm sure if you had one of our Republican colleagues from Baltimore County here, they would be telling you that they did it for both the most pure and reasons. So pure and nonpartisan reasons. Other questions? Yes.
So I was wondering about the in-state costs for education. What is that, like, does that affect illegal immigrants? Is that what it's talking about?
So you notice I use the term undocumented immigrants. Other people use the term illegal immigrants. We have in Maryland, because we have throughout our history been, as probably many of your own family histories, from your own family histories, we have been a destination for immigrants from around the world. Many people, that's why when you're in Baltimore and you see Little Italy and Greektown and all the different ethnic neighborhoods around Baltimore, people have always come here from around the world, and people are still coming here from around the world. And you have, and especially like in my part of the state, and I represent the district that I have the second largest concentration of Hispanics, of people who identify as Hispanic in the census. So, and one of the things that I found is you have a lot of adults who have come to this country legally and left spouses, left children back in the country that they came from. And as you would imagine in your own life, if you left a spouse on the other side of the planet, or you left a child on the other side of the world, you would want to see them. And people have come completely legally, entered the country on a tourist visa to stay 3 months, 6 months, and as you would imagine, the separation, to be able to say goodbye to your kids and put them on the plane and say, I guess I'll see you in another 2 years, That can be very hard. So they've kept their children here. The parents have made the decision to keep their children here. They've gone to public schools in the state because, interestingly, federal law says you can't check anyone's immigration status. So whether you like it or not, we provide a free public education to every child who shows up at the door, regardless of their immigration status. And then they graduate high school and can't go on. They can't come to a community college. They can't go to a four-year institution unless they pay the full out-of-state rate. I don't know if any of you have ever looked at what it would cost to be an out-of-state or out-of-county student at CCBC. It's not cheap now to come to this school. It's going to be multiple times more expensive to come to the school. It means people don't. I was at my kids' fall picnic last night, and I was talking to a woman. You know, obviously people know you're elected official, they start coming over and talking to you, and we were talking about this, and she said that she came over as a child and only received documentation when she was a senior in high school and was able to go to college, get a college education, get a great job, is a lawyer. Her best friend in high school never got documentation, and she cleans houses for a living now. Now that's noble work. I don't want to demean anyone for, if that's the job you're going to do to support your family, that's good work. But imagine the economic trajectory of those two women and their families. And that's the same thing. We have thousands, tens of thousands of people living here who are undocumented, who know no other country. And this is their opportunity to have an education. This is their opportunity to, in essence, live their part of the American dream. And so, yes, it is, those are the students that we're talking about.
Well, I was just curious as to why maybe they didn't get documentation while they were here. Like, they can apply for citizenship. So why if they came as children, then you would think that after 18 years, if they came like as small children, that they would have gotten documentation at some point.
So some of it could be their parents didn't do the right thing and get the documentation. The other piece of it is, you know, I don't know if you know, there are very strict quotas to the number of people who can immigrate from every country. It's unlike, as an Italian American, it's unlike when my ancestors came here in 1915, they just got on a boat and came. And as long as they walked through the door and were smart enough to say they weren't an anarchist, didn't have TB, and weren't mentally ill, they got into the country. Now there's the quota system, and you have to apply at the embassy in your home country. So if you came here from El Salvador, you'd have to return. You'd have to take the kids back to El Salvador, go to the embassy in San Salvador, and apply. You can't do that here. And that can be a financial burden and a risk that these families don't want to take, because once you leave, getting back, you're jeopardizing that.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Yes?
So if you're here on a student visa or a working visa, like, can't you just take a test here for citizenship?
Nope.
You have to go back to your country?
Yep. It's very hard. It is very hard. We make it exceedingly hard, and I would argue too hard, because we're a country, we are a country almost, well, we are a country entirely of immigrants. I mean, whether you're Native Americans who immigrate, and your ancestors immigrated 10,000 years ago, there are no human beings who are native to North America. Everyone came here one way or another, some people by choice, some people obviously compelled, but everyone is from somewhere else in this country. And yet we make it exceedingly hard for people who want that opportunity now to do it. So they can't, it's not that simple. Now, once someone like, let's say you were undocumented, you came to CCBC and you got a associate's in nursing, because obviously we know we need nurses in our community. If you get a skill that is in short supply or in demand in the state or in the country, yes, then you can go and file. And so that's what we're trying to do, is say, all right, here's an opportunity for you. You've been here, we've educated you, you want to go to college, get that degree, and then file for legal status. And by getting the education, that is going to give you the ability to get that legal status. Yes?
I have a two-part question.
I have a three-part answer.
Okay. During the Democratic National Committee, it was on the platform that we're starting to support gay and lesbian rights mostly. But why are there still people in the Democratic Party like Emmett Burns, who are just so against gay marriage? It's like almost like he's speaking like it would kill them. And then another one is, why is taxation going up in our state?
Two very different questions then. Because we don't let gay and lesbian people marry. No, is that a good answer? No. So Emmett Burns, who is referenced, Delegate Burns is a Democratic legislator from the western side of Baltimore County. He's probably famous. Many of you may know of him because of the controversy over the last few weeks between Delegate Burns and a member of the Ravens, Brendan Iambadejo. As a resident of the Washington area, it's harder to pronounce some of these players. So, although as everyone pointed out, I'm wearing a purple tie today.
Don't worry, I'm a Skins fan, so you're...
Oh, okay. So he took on Brendan. He sent a letter to the owner of the Ravens saying, "You shouldn't be allowed. You should stop this player from speaking out for marriage equality." Brendan has this incredible story. He was born in Nigeria, Nigerian father, Irish American mother. When they came back to this country, they were poor, they were homeless in Southern California. His mother got a job as the residence hall manager at a facility, at a dorm at the University of California, Santa Cruz, which was a dorm, which was the gay and lesbian, bisexual, transgender interest facility. The University of California system being slightly different than CCBC. And so they started to live in a dorm that had lots of gay people. And as a 12-year-old, he started to see and interact with all these GLBT people and understood, well, there's really no difference between a gay person and a straight person. There's their wishes for their lives, their interests are the same, and he just became committed to the cause and has stood up for years for GLBT rights, and early on was a defender of marriage when it wasn't as when it wasn't as popular as it might be today. So Delegate Burns wanted the Ravens to shut him down. When said, there are football fans who don't like this, he's a public figure, you should stop it. And it blew up into this national controversy. Why is Delegate Burns still a Democrat? Well, both parties have people that don't fit every part of their philosophy. Delegate Burns is committed to a number of other issues. I've had severe disagreements with him on this issue. We have been in agreement on some other issues, but the Democratic Party platform this year embraced marriage equality for gay and lesbian couples, not just gay rights broadly speaking, but specifically marriage equality. Whereas obviously the Republican platform, in fact, embraces a constitutional amendment that would not only ban marriage nationwide, it would also ban things like civil unions and domestic partnership benefits. It would completely legally put us in, I don't know, fourth class status in this country. So when it comes to taxes in Maryland, why are taxes going up in Maryland? Well, because we have a lot of needs for public services and the ability to pay for them is declining because of the economic downturn. And we in Maryland have decided, and all of you will have the opportunity in 2 years to cast us all out if you want, but we in Maryland have decided that it's important to keep these services going. And in order to do that, if we need to ask people who are in the top 10% of earners, 10%, I said not 1%, 10% in Maryland, to pay an additional 0.25% to 0.5% increase in their income tax rate in order to make sure that we continue to have moderately affordable tuition at community colleges, at higher ed institutions, as long as we continue to invest in education, that those things are the right things to do. and that we're making a slightly different decision in Maryland than many other states right now. And we're hoping that that investment will make sure that in the future we will be a more prosperous state. Look, we don't have natural resource. I mean, yes, we have things like the Chesapeake Bay. We don't have huge gas deposits, mineral deposits, oil deposits. We are a human resource state. We succeed in this state. We have prosperity in the state because of the intellectual talents of our state. The governor calls it our intellectual infrastructure in our state. If we don't keep that up, if we don't make investments in that, that will break just like a bridge or a tunnel will break. And we're going to keep up that investment, and we're going to ask people to pay their fair share. Yes. Oh, he hasn't asked a question before, so can I?
To try to attach to his question of taxation, the whole thing about the gaming and casinos. Now, when it deals with trying to get casinos into Maryland, as far as in Timonium and Prince George's County, by bringing revenue from the casino industry, do you see that by getting money from that our taxes will go down, or like housing property might go up because of it, or?
So if I can, so he was asking a question about if the ballot question 7 passes about gaming expansion, will that bring in enough revenue that it could reduce taxes? I gotta, just so that everyone is clear, the expansion site would be in Prince George's County, right by the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, so right by where 95 crosses into Prince George's County. You referenced Timonium. There won't be a site in Timonium. There's a site that is allocated for downtown Baltimore, so which a coalition, a group of businesses led by Caesars International has been awarded the license. So right, not far from the football, baseball stadium, they can put a facility down there. So that's what we're talking about. The additional money that will come in as a result of gaming, which is all dedicated to what the Education Trust Fund, is designed to keep up our ability to meet our plan commitments to, now in this case it's K through 12, the money has gone to K through 12 funding. So I don't know if it will ever result, unless things get so much better that we start dropping tax rates, I don't think it'll ever result in lower taxes. I think it will mitigate the need potentially for additional taxes in the future to have that revenue coming into the state. Yes. Oh, no, yes, you had a question?
About the expanded gaming, the casinos that are being built, will revenue be going to just affect the district that it's being built in? I remember the ads going about the new casino they put in Anne Arundel, about it being for like the police and teachers and things, but is it just for that district, or will it like benefit the entire state?
So the way that the funding formula works for, or the tax structure for gaming works, is the majority of the public revenues go to the state education trust fund, which is then dispersed to all of the counties inverse to wealth. All of our state aid provides money to each local jurisdiction inverse to their local wealth. So a very wealthy jurisdiction like Howard County gets less per pupil than a poor jurisdiction like Baltimore City. So it goes back out to all the local governments. A piece of the revenue is reserved for the local jurisdictions that have the facility. So roughly, I think it is 8% of the revenues at like the Baltimore City location will return to Baltimore City for the city to, whether it's invest in police, infrastructure, because clearly having a facility means you gotta have the police, the fire, the emergency equipment to deal with the facility, but also to pay for some of the other things you want out of the budget. There's an interesting additional piece for Baltimore City, that because Pimlico was not allowed to get a license, and that was the initial conversation, there is a sliver of money, like 1.5%, that comes from every facility that goes to the neighborhoods around Pimlico to help fix up that part to make Pimlico a more attractive destination. But that's the only thing that is dedicated strictly to Baltimore City. So yes, every facility, every county that hosts a facility, whether it's Cecil County or Baltimore City or Prince George's if they do it, they get a small slice of the money directly. Yes, I'll come back to it. Oh, he did. So, yes.
I always hear people talking like K through 12, K through 12, K through 12, and I understand children are our future, Michael Jackson's song, all that kind of stuff. But what is the Maryland General Assembly, and specifically you, if you can elaborate, doing to lower college costs? Like, tuition has gone up at CCBC for a couple of semesters now, so I was wondering, like, what's going on to lower college tuition?
So, I can talk a lot about it, but if you let me then get into CCBC, my answer may not be as attractive as if we were talking at the University of Baltimore or UMBC. Over the last 7 years, Maryland has held down tuition at the four-year institutions to, on average, a 1% a year growth. Now, during the good years, we did that by providing them a lot of additional money. What it means to you is the funding formula for community colleges is all based upon the per pupil amount of money we give the four-year institutions. So as we drive up spending to the four-year institutions on a per pupil basis, it drives up the aid for the community colleges. Now, over the last few years, because of this severe economic downturn, we have been curtailing increases, but still trying to hold the line on the four-year institutions because they're state institutions, and this is not a state institution. We have not wanted to enforce a tuition cap on the community colleges. And let that be an individual local decision or campus and institutional decision. So as a result, unfortunately, the community college tuition has gone up at a higher rate, off of a much lower base, but at a higher rate than the four-year institutions.
So it's not technically the state's fault, it's the jurisdiction, like it'd be either Baltimore County or CCBC's fault?
I don't want to, I mean, we are every level of government is at fault for this. I don't want to say, I'm not going to stand here and say, yes, it's all my colleagues in Baltimore. Call Kevin Kamenetz and complain to him because it's his fault, not mine. I mean, we have made certain policy choices that have impacted the amount of state aid that comes to the community colleges. Unfortunately, we're at a time when both because of the sheer growth of young people, and you're the largest, people talk about the baby boom. You're a much larger generation, believe it or not, than the baby boom. So we've got more young people than ever before, more young people trying to go to college than ever before, and we're not increasing resources, which means there's less per pupil. It's a challenge for every institution to try to handle it at a time when we're trying to get more people to go to college, more people to get credentials. The president, the governor have adopted this, the drive to have 55% of adults have a college credential, an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, or a certificate, a one-year certificate by I think it's 2025, 55 by 25. That's a tall order because in Maryland, we're well ahead and we're still only in the 40s. So to get people through, it's going to take an effort, which is, personally, which is why someone like myself, you heard my introduction. I've been in the legislature since 2002. I've voted to raise, and we have, the income tax, the sales tax, the cigarette tax, the alcohol tax, the corporate income tax. I mean, about the only thing we haven't taxed is intercourse. So, I mean, I don't, and I've often suggested that we should and make it an entirely voluntary tax. And we'll report the names of the top 100 taxpayers in the states, because that's the tax everyone would want to like. So anyway, I'm sorry, what?
Wouldn't half of them be politicians?
I wouldn't be surprised if, knowing some of my colleagues, they would want to be on the list. No, but, and I just said that on cable television. So I know Senator Norman Stone is going to call me later today. So, but anyway, I mean, many of us have worked very hard to make sure that we have the resources to keep this up during very difficult times. When I tried, in relation to, I think, your last question when we talked about it, when other states have gone a different direction. And you see enormous tuition increases. I went to a meeting of legislators from around the country, the National Conference of State Legislatures. They pulled 7 states together that were all doing interesting things on higher education. And I just stand up and talk about what we've done in higher education. And I talked about our tuition freeze and how, as a result, we've limited tuition increases to roughly 1% to 2% over the last 7 years. And the people from California just were amazed. I mean, they talk about double-digit increases in tuition every semester, not just on a yearly basis, every semester. The state of Washington reduced funding for higher education by 50%. In other states, they are making it very difficult and very expensive. And again, to go back to the point that I tried to make before, we've gone in a different direction in Maryland, and we will see in a generation, thanks to all of you, how that pays off in our economic stability and competitiveness compared to other states which are abandoning the concept of higher education, a public, affordable higher education. Yes?
So I was just wondering, like, it has to do with his question. Wouldn't it make more sense to make it more affordable for 2 years? Because not everybody goes to a 4-year school. So wouldn't it make more sense to freeze the tuition for 2 years than it would for 4 years? Because more people go to, like, not everybody goes to a 4-year. There's a lot of people that go to a 2-year, so it would make more sense to make the 2-year more affordable.
I do think moving forward, and there are many of us in the legislature who are engaged on this issue, I think we are going to have to revisit in a serious way how we fund community colleges in this state, because you are completely correct. And from an individual student perspective, you're better off starting, if you're not sure, you're better off starting your least expensive route. Because why do you want 1 year of private school tuition and the loan and the debt associated with that when you could get a credential that can never be taken away from you in 1 year at a community college? So we have to revisit many of these issues around incentivizing community colleges, providing more money to the community colleges, because Maryland, every state goes in a different direction. Just like when I was talking about the constitutions, every state constitution is slightly different. Every state constitution has unique features. We've made some decisions about community colleges that are vastly different than other states. In California, every community college is a state institution. There's a single board. Many states, they're all state institutions. In Maryland, we haven't done that. We have each county, each community college is its own entity. There's a loose affiliation, but there is a chancellor of the University System of Maryland, and all the system schools, all the public higher ed institutions are under him, but Morgan State. There's no chancellor of community colleges. in this state. There's no state agency that operates community colleges, and as a result, they're left. Each community college in Maryland is left fighting resources from their county, from their students, and from the state, and that can be a very difficult and challenging part of administering and operating a successful community college. And hopefully, when we have the resources, when we get out of this holding on to our current commitments, but start thinking about the future, community college, I know from my perspective, community colleges will be at the top of the agenda because it makes complete sense to help people the most at community colleges. Because if nothing else, I mean, there are so many people who start and stop. You know it maybe from your own life, you know it from your friends, and you know, I've always found it fascinating. If you go to this school and try to get an associate's in business, which I would assume CCBC offers somewhere at one of the campuses, you do 60 credits, you get that associate's degree, you have it. If you go on to a 4-year institution and drop out after one semester your junior year, you'll always have that associate's degree. You'll always have that credential. If you're someone who starts at UB or at College Park and you're trying to major in business, and you get those 60 credits in business, and then something happens, you drop out your junior year, you have 60 credits in business. You have no credential. You have to start over somewhere. You don't even know if in 2 or 3 years you're going to start up again. If you have to go to another institution, are those 60 credits even going to count anymore? I mean, that's why a community college is so important. That associate's degree is so important because it's that credential that can never be taken away from you. And when we're trying to get so many new students, so many students from families who have never gone to college, didn't plan for college, the community college is the perfect gateway for them. It's important for the families, and as all of you as taxpayers, it's important as taxpayers because it's a lot cheaper for a taxpayer for you to be sitting here than to be sitting at the University of Maryland College Park. If you don't know that you're going to be out the door in 4 years. So, I don't know if we've come to the, do you have a question? Oh, great. I'm happy to answer individual questions. I want to thank you for taking this opportunity to listen to me, to hear a little bit about our interesting state history, a history we should be proud of, even though there's plenty of aspects of it that are shameful. But we are fortunate to be Marylanders. We're fortunate to have this opportunity, I think, to live in a state that values and tries to value all of its residents. I mean, whether you speak English or you don't, whether you're straight or you're gay, whether you're black, white, Asian, we have a unique state. You have a unique opportunity again in November to, I think, keep that tradition of tolerance alive in our state by the way that you vote on November 6th. And I hope, if nothing else, I hope you won't miss that opportunity to vote in this election. So thank you all for your time and your attention.